Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Tsoukalis, back with another big game preview this week with Alabama headed to LSU Baton Rouge, 6:30 p.m. kickoff, a night game in Tiger Stadium. Doesn't get too much better than that. Game day is down there. You can watch the game on ABC if you're tuned in. Very excited for this one, Tony, as I know fans are, as I know the team is. We've gotten to talk to DeBoer and everybody again back from the bye week. I've also, I noticed this week. It's felt like forever since we've had football. This bye week to me has felt a lot longer than the last bye week. So I think everyone's just eager to watch this Crimson Tide team coming off of the bye. And obviously we had some coverage of that last week, but now as we're in an actual game week again, like I ask you every week, what's been the general vibe from coaches, players, as we've geared up for LSU?
I think there's a lot of anticipation. I think people kind of know that their backs are against the wall and that, that this is kind of an elimination game. So I think that, the players are just as excited about this matchup as we are. And so there's probably a lot to prove on that end, and there's a lot to get right. But I think that Missouri game last time out was it answered a few questions, and I think it kind of maybe eased a few nerves and maybe gave some confidence as well. So I think that this team, from a vibe standpoint, is probably fine. But this is kind of a show me game or a prove it game. A lot of that Missouri game was false because Missouri just didn't have an offense, and so it's really easy to A, shut them down. When you're on defense, but B, it just takes a lot of pressure off when off your own offense when the other team's not going to score. So I'd like to see what they do against nobody's talking about this LSU team as a playoff contender, but if they beat Alabama, we'll certainly be a playoff contender.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a team with much more firepower than Alabama faced last week. And there was, more talk of the shutout against Missouri. It, kind of emphasized again this week how huge that was for this Alabama defense. And we'll get into that as well. But obviously, Tony, you mentioned the playoff. We should touch on that briefly because, of course, on Tuesday, we had the first ever, 12-team ranking for the college football playoff. I don't think anyone is too shocked with Alabama's spot. They were 11th, just like they were in the AP poll. I don't think people were too shocked, and two, obviously, still a very long way to go. A lot of football left to be played out to see where all this shakes out, but still fun to look at the hypotheticals. I enjoyed seeing the graphic back when the first 4-team playoff came out when Mississippi State was the number 1 team in the country, which is just a very funny look back. But Alabama was 11th, and a hypothetical matchup against Texas was what their draw was in the first playoff in Austin, which, I think would be a pretty fun trip and obviously a very good team in the Longhorns.
Shoot, it's not going to happen, but it would certainly would be fun. Sign me up for that. I just stopped the count. I just have the playoff right now. I'd love to go to Austin again. We got to go there. What was it, 2 years ago? That was a great trip. I'm obviously from Texas, so I love that. But I think Alabama's kind of where you think it would be. I was having a discussion with someone. I'm not sure. I guess there's a path maybe that they could host the game, but it's going to be kind of unlikely at this point. So you're probably competing for seeding, climbing up the rankings. I could see them, maybe getting to like 9 or, I guess maybe they don't have that far to climb to host the game. I guess it's possible. There's some teams in front of them that they're going to have to beat, but I think in terms of winning out, Alabama's in control of its own destiny, barring maybe a weird shakeup where I could see maybe if an SMU wins the ACC and beats an undefeated Miami, do both those teams go ahead of Alabama? Maybe, but I think for the most part, I think Alabama's pretty safe.
Yeah, it was a very big win for the SEC and Big Ten, I think, when those rankings came out, because you have very obvious scenarios, like you just said, where the ACC and Big 12 are probably only 1-bid leagues. And so what that means for Alabama, I guess, remains to be seen. But a lot of games left, and obviously Alabama firmly in that playoff mix. But we'll have to win this game to stay in that mix and to have at least increased chances of making the playoff. A third loss is pretty dooming even at this point in the season, and a huge one for both teams. LSU's kind of in the same boat, like you said, trying to work their way back into that conversation, would certainly do that on Saturday. So with that, table setting, I guess let's dive into, some of the stuff we've learned and heard from coaches, talking about LSU. This is a good football team, particularly on the offensive end. You talk about Texas. We've got two quarterbacks from Texas matching up. I know you wrote about that. Jalen Milroe, of course, and Garrett Nussmeier, who I think you discovered is originally from Louisiana, right? But he moved to Texas, so adopted son.
Yeah, Garrett, the son of Doug Nussmeier, former Alabama offensive coordinator, who was working with the Cowboys, which is why Garrett spent his high school years at Flower Mound, up by Dallas. So yeah, Louisiana, but a former Texas high school football player, sure.
Yeah. So nevertheless, adopted son, what have you. It's fun for the narrative. You got two quarterbacks from Texas, but Nussmeier, I mean, he's been a topic of conversation all week. One of the better passers in this conference, Tony, and has, you mentioned the upgrade from an offensive standpoint from Missouri to LSU for Alabama, a ton of weaponry as well, on the outside and protected by a really good offensive line. What have you heard from just what Alabama's seen from LSU on film, and how, do you think they're going to approach kind of attacking this LSU team? And who do you like, maybe from LSU that makes plays?
Yeah, I mean, well, LSU has the components to really hurt Alabama. They can attack deep. They've got, guys like Kyron Lacey. A person that Alabama is really familiar with is Aaron Anderson, is a quick, very fast receiver that can make big plays. And then you got Garrett Nussmeier, who can make all those throws and get the ball to his playmaker. He's got one of the best arms in the conference. I think when you look at Garrett, though, the thing that maybe Alabama tries to attack is he's a gunslinger, and he makes mistakes. He's second in the SEC in passing and in touchdown passes with 20, but then he also has 9 interceptions, and that's something that Alabama can exploit. That's something that Texas A&M exploited, and they had 3 the last time out, and they were able to get a win over the Tigers. So I think you force him into some pressure, and I think also another thing that you do is LSU ranks 111th in rushing. They're a very one-dimensional team. If you can get them one-dimensional, I think you can provide some more help to the secondary, and then I think that that might help. And then you just maybe get some confusing looks for Garrett Nussmeier. And another thing too, kind of ramble on here, but you got to take advantage of those turnovers when you get them. Alabama hasn't had a defensive touchdown or a non-offensive touchdown in general. So yeah, it'd be nice. A pick 6, I think, in this game could go a long way.
Yeah, certainly could. And you touched on some of those matchups, but talk about LSU in the trenches, because they have all these guys on the outside, like you mentioned, Lacey, Anderson. We could talk about Mason Miller unless that's a name that's going to haunt Alabama fans too harshly. But I mean, on the inside, you've got 2 legit NFL draft guys. What is, the defensive staff, whether it's Womack, I know we talked to Freddie Roach, the D-line coach. What has he said about Will Campbell, Emory Jones, and countering, those 2? Because those are guys who are going to play on Sunday, and a big, big test for that defensive line.
Yeah, like I said, that the offensive line hasn't been able to get much going on the running game, but when it comes to protecting the quarterback, they do a really good job. Will Campbell is a top 5 NFL draft pick according to most projections. He's one of the best. You saw what I don't know how many pass blocking snaps he took against Ole Miss in their defensive line, but he didn't allow a pressure, I think, against that unit, which is really impressive. You got Jones on the other side, another probably first round pick, maybe, early second kind of guy in terms of what's being projected. So, I mean, yeah, they're going to protect Nussmeier. Alabama's going to have to try to get, some pressure, because I think if you give Nussmeier some time to work, they have those deep options, like what I said. So I think this is a big game for, like an LT Overton. They talk about first round picks. Here's a guy that, you have a good game against Will Campbell. Like, all of a sudden that could be that whatever that performance that takes you into a first round pick. We were talking about, earlier this year about, maybe Alabama not having a first round pick. And I think LT is one of those guys that can make a jump. And this would be a great moment for him to do it. His momentum seems to be rising. And I think that, he could really kind of capitalize it on a game where everyone's going to be watching. I mean, it's going to be prime time, and there's going to be a lot of eyeballs, a lot of scouts at this game. So I think it's a big matchup to watch.
Yeah, definitely. It's, going to be probably the best offensive line they've faced. I think that's relatively safe to say. And, I want to touch on injury there in a second, but I want to go back to another thing that you said, which you mentioned Texas A&M against LSU put up maybe the best defensive performance we've seen from a team against LSU this season. And, Kane Womack, I know, was asked about that this week. He said he liked some things that the Aggies did, and that Ole Miss did against LSU at times. I remember I talked to Jamarian Latham. He kind of touched on that. He said when he watches film, he likes to see what other pass rushers do and try and emulate that. He starts to practice those moves in practice. How big is that from a film standpoint, just having more teams on tape? And you've seen now, even just last week, a team finally have success against LSU that could possibly help you. Obviously, it's different personnel and all that stuff, but it seems like it's a benefit to have those performances to look back at from other teams as well.
Yeah, I think anytime you get more tape on a team, you're able to attack their weaknesses a little bit better. I think the other key factor to that is you have 2 weeks to prepare for a team, and so you're going to be able to implement some new stuff. On the same hand, though, I don't think you can go too much into when you try to correct or overcorrect on some things, you maybe get away from what you do and what makes your defense work. So you can't kind of go crazy with stuff like that. Obviously, it's something you can look at, but you got to be careful not to lose your own identity by trying to just attack a weakness that you find. But sure, I mean, I think that it's going to help the other way around too. I mean, LSU has 2 weeks to prepare for Alabama and more tape on Alabama. So it's at this point in the season, it's about who can scheme better. I think one of the positives you look for from an Alabama standpoint is how well they schemed when they had an extra week to prepare against Georgia. If Kalen DeBoer can come up with another plan that's just as effective as that first half against Georgia, Alabama's going to win. I mean, that was an expertly drawn out game plan, and everything was clicking for Alabama. So we'll see if it's I think you're going to get a lot of praise from him and his game planning if Alabama has a similar performance or starts off just as hot Saturday night.
Absolutely. And I want to go back briefly to Nussmeier for a second, because I tried to ask some players and coaches about this, and obviously they don't like to compare or look back. But you mentioned Georgia, Alabama rattled, a good pocket passing quarterback, or at least pocket passing based quarterback, I guess, in Carson Beck. What are your thoughts when you think of, you compared Nussmeier to Beck a little bit? Do you see maybe Alabama having a little bit more success? We've seen them struggle against quarterbacks that are a little bit more mobile, and that offense is kind of tailored around them. Do you see Alabama having maybe more success getting to, a quarterback in Nussmeier who you said can be mistake prone? Isn't, can get out of the pocket and make plays, but it isn't necessarily, a Jalen Milroe or even a Marcel Reed type of running quarterback.
It definitely seems like the running quarterbacks hurt Alabama more than the pocket passers. I mean, but you got to think Alabama had success against, Carson Beck, and they were able to force some interceptions, but he still kind of torched them at the end of that game. So That's not necessarily, I don't think that you necessarily look at that performance and say, oh, they just handled Carson Beck. I mean, I think that's a good indicator of how important turnovers will be. But I mean, it was getting to the point where Georgia was scoring at will at the end of that one. So if Nussmeier can have that kind of success, I think LSU would probably take it, sans some of those turnovers, But I think Alabama secondary, you would think, has gotten a little bit better since then too. A lot of people are going to have to grow up, though. I mean, in terms of guarding this passing attack, you're going to have a big game from Xavier Brown. You might have to have some of the younger guys even, step up in the secondary, in the safety level, if you have to, like a Bray Hubbard, right? This could be a huge game for him as well. So I think Alabama's got the pieces to attack LSU, but there's not like a ton of confidence. I mean, that is a weakness of Alabama's and a strength of LSU. So, it's going to be something that you definitely have to monitor. I think you could argue too that LSU has better receiving weapons than Georgia has. So, that's another thing to consider when you're kind of making those two comparisons.
Yeah, definitely. It goes back to what we said at the top, where it does have to be a complete game, and you think about, again, against Missouri, they had that, and how much, that creates momentum in carrying forward, because you have to, you can't play a half of football against LSU, or you will lose, just like they almost did to Georgia against a quarterback that can hurt you greatly through the air. So yeah, that's a very good point. And, we'll see how they do choose to respond. Kind of on the run defense front, you mentioned this a little bit. LSU, not the most phenomenal running team. Their leading guy is a guy named Caden Durham. He's got almost 400 yards, 6 touchdowns, averages around 5.4 yards per carry. LSU also is going to be without its best run blocking offensive lineman, Garrett Dillinger. He's a guard They obviously still have Campbell, still have Jones, and you alluded to this a little bit, but do you think the key here for Womack's defense is dialing up pressure to make Nussmeier uncomfortable? Is it going all in on stopping the run to make them one-dimensional, or is it a little bit of both? In
It's
terms of
always a little bit. Yeah, it's always a little bit of both. But I think if you can stop the run, it's kind of going to be the same thing for Alabama on the offensive side of the ball too. But like if you can stop the run on the early downs and force 3rd and 8s where it's an obvious pass situation, then you can really dial up some pressures, or you can put extra coverage in, and you can kind of help your secondary out. If you're dealing with a lot of 3rd and 4s, I think that's when LSU can kind of hit you for some big yardage, because you still got to respect the run. So it's a little bit of both. You can't just go blitz crazy against this LSU team either, because I think if they get out of it, then they're going to be able to hit you deep. You're not going to be well protected back there. Right. And like I said, they do have good tackles that can block. So you got to be careful with how you blitz them. But I think it's just really putting Garrett Nussmeier in as many adverse situations and then hoping you can capitalize on them. And just kind of also realizing that he is going to beat you sometimes, because I think he's a good quarterback and they've got some pretty good receivers as well.
Yeah, you're going to have to take the good with the bad there from he's going to throw for some big first downs, maybe some scores. If you are going for, like you said, those takeaways, maybe your first defensive touchdown, which I agree could be absolutely huge in a game like this. And the 3rd downs, I'm glad you touched on that, because that was a point, Kane Womack said earlier this week that he thinks his team is slowly improving in that area. And it's going to be vital, like you said, to not only get off the field on 3rd down, but prevent, like you said, some 3rd and 4s, 3rd and 5s, and just not giving LSU anything super easy. I think that'll be huge. Switching to the other side of the ball for Alabama on offense, and you kind of thinking along the same lines. I've been looking at LSU. I've kind of seen some similar defensive struggles to Alabama, and we talked about it a little bit. They've struggled against some of these mobile quarterbacks. Lenore Sellers had a pretty good day against LSU. Marcel Reed for Texas A&M played pretty well on the ground. And when you hear that, I kind of think, could this maybe be a good game for Jalen Milroe? Through the air, he's obviously going to have to make plays, but are you kind of expecting him to maybe have an explosive day on the ground here?
Well, he had 155 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground against LSU last year. So, I mean, you talk about mobile quarterbacks that have given this LSU team problem. He's probably number 1 on the list. I think he's going to have to. I think he's going to, I think this is an improved LSU team, but like you said, it's a team that has allowed some big runs. And I don't think it's, that much improved that it's just going to be able to shut down Jalen Milroe. No, you talked about, film and stuff. I mean, obviously it's going to help that they've seen him before. I think with Marcel Reed too, he came off the bench. So how much did, they really kind of prepare for that? I think that's maybe why they look so susceptible to him. But then when you look at, Jalen Milroe compared to Marcel Reed, and you've got a freshman compared to a redshirt junior. And I think that, I think Jalen can hurt you a lot more with his arm, and you have to respect him a lot more too. So that's going to open up running lanes. I expect him to have a good game. And honestly, he's going to have to. I think this could, depending on the weather and depending on a lot of things, I mean, it could turn into a more of an offensive game. I don't think this is going to be like a defensive struggle like we saw last road game against Tennessee. So I think both these offenses can score, and I think you're going to need Jalen Milroe to step up. This is a huge game for him. This is, I don't expect him to come back next year. So, he's playing to go out on top. And I think that, this kind of almost ends his career if he loses. There's really I'm not saying that he won't play again, but it's kind of like they won't play in another meaningful game really again. So it'd be interesting, to see what he looks like with his back against the wall. And I'm sure he has a lot to prove too, because, he didn't really perform well against Tennessee his last road game in a big environment like this. I think he's going to want to, come out and do well. And then the other thing I'd point out is just last year, it was the month of November where we saw Jalen Milroe step up and be this, transformed kind of playmaker that pushed Alabama to the playoff. And look, we're in November again, and he's coming off another open week. Maybe you can get a redo of what happened last year, and we just see a whole different Jalen Milroe that's just more improved and ready for that postseason surge. And that would be very optimistic for Alabama.
Yeah, I'm going back to, I remember we had this conversation preseason, was the Mr. November nickname. We were joking about that, but you kind of answered it. I was going to segue off that. This is a big legacy game, I think, for a lot of guys, but for Jalen Milroe especially. Not only can you prove it, you know, against a good team. Yes, they're not the best defense, but they're definitely up there. They got a new D coordinator in Blake Baker this offseason. They can scheme some stuff up. So not only does that, prove from maybe an NFL standpoint, but even your own college legacy, cementing some things, showing up on the road is going to be huge. Alabama, that's been a big point of emphasis, is DeBoer, kind of taking their approach and him saying, we've been doing the right things in the build up to road games, but just hasn't executed on the day. So I think that's stuff we should definitely be watching closely. If you have any more thoughts on that, or whether it's a legacy game or just showing up.
It's definitely a legacy game for him. I think he needs to, if he doesn't win this game, I mean, this could be the kind of game not only for a legacy. It's I think for his professional career, this is going to be a big game. This is such a weird quarterback class that I don't think anybody really knows what quarterbacks are going to fall in the first round and what's not. And at one point, I think after the Georgia game, people were thinking maybe that Jalen could even be the number 1 overall pick, and I thought at the time was kind of overplayed. But now it's like he doesn't seem like a first rounder at all. I'm not sure we're ready to write him off yet. I mean, if he comes in and has a strong performance against LSU, continues that, builds it up. I mean, look, Alabama's got a lot of winnable games after this. If you can beat LSU and then do well in the month of November, head into the playoffs hot, have a few good games in the playoffs. I mean, shoot, even maybe lead Alabama to a title. We're really kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but I think he has a path to get back up in the first round and be a high draft pick. And it starts with this game. If he loses this game, then his last 2 big performances are bad games, and all of a sudden he doesn't really have another stage to kind of prove himself. So yeah, I think it's going to have to be a legacy game for him.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's important game for him, I think, in a lot of aspects. You're absolutely right. And staying on the offense in terms of a playmaker, another game this is important for one of Alabama's kind of top guys on offense. And I was going through your 5 points this morning to go read those on Tide Illustrated. We should touch on the fun Kendrick Law narrative with this game, because of course he's a Louisiana native from Shreveport. I know he was asked about it this week and going back home, or to his home state at least. How big is that for him, and a player who feels like if there's a game for him to finally have the Kendrick Law game that I feel like we've been waiting for all season, it's Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, he grew up an LSU fan, and this is obviously a big moment for him, playing in front of family. He did make the trip to LSU his freshman year, but I mean, he wasn't really a part of. I think he recorded his first tackle, if I remember right, on special teams, but he wasn't really a part of the offensive game plan as a true freshman. Now you think he'd probably have a lot bigger role, and not only just with his role as a starter, but now he's fully healthy from his lower body injury. I think you're going to see him be implemented more into the offense. All that said, as big of a game as it could be for him, he claims that he's not treating it any differently, that he treats every game like a champion. He's saying all the right stuff. So I don't know if he's going to get carried away. He seemed like he was pretty level-headed, like he was excited about going home, but not like to the point where it was going to be a distraction. We'll have to see. I think a lot of people talk that way, and then in their minds, it can be a little bit of a different story. But I think, just regardless of that, he's a guy that you can do so many plays with and so many things. And now that he's healthy, especially coming off an open week, you kind of think, if Kalen DeBoer is going to drop something special, is Kendrick Law part of that? And I wouldn't be surprised if they have a little gadget play for him. Maybe let him do something cool. Maybe we have like a wide receivers sweep pass or something like that. Let him like really show out in front of his friends and family. That'd be kind of a neat moment for him.
I would enjoy that. Greatly. I think that'd be fun. Yeah, throw a wide receiver pass into the works. Maybe just, give him the green light to return kicks or something, like any, even if you want to take it out of the end zone, you do it, see if you can make a play. But yeah, I'm excited to see the Law homecoming. I just think we have to have a Kendrick Law game at some point. I just feel like that's coming eventually. And we'll obviously see. He's going to be for sure more part of the plans than he was there, or than he was when he was there at LSU last time. Wanted to get specific for a second, Tony, with one matchup each that we're kind of looking for. We talked about a lot of things, on both sides of the ball in terms of how Alabama's going to match up against LSU. But when you think of maybe one, whether it's an individual player or two position groups going at it, where do you think might be a big difference or might make the difference for Alabama in this game in terms of if they win this certain, one matchup or battle?
Yeah, I think, we talked about LSU's our offensive line and protecting Nussmeier. I think you got to look at the other way too. And you look at LSU, I think they're ranked sixth in the nation in sacks. You've got a guy named Braden Swinson who has 8 sacks for them on the defensive end. I think I'm not sure which side he'll necessarily always be matched up against, but if he's going up against, an Elijah Pritchett on the right side, that could be, an interesting or maybe a scary matchup for Alabama. Swinson has 8 sacks and 34 pressures, and then you look at a guy like Elijah Pritchett, who's allowed 19 pressures and 4 sacks, and Pritchett at times has looked like his 5-star self. I mean, he hasn't been awful. He definitely, the talent is there, but it's very inconsistent, and when he misses bad, and he really leaves Jalen Milroe out to dry. So, if he has some of those bad misses, they could turn into turnovers the other way. We talked about Alabama forcing turnovers. LSU can do that too. And I think that they're going to need Elijah Pritchett to kind of step up. Another game where you look at maybe that extra week might kind of help him get some of those fundamentals right, get some of that consistency right, because they're really going to need him to kind of man up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge matchup for sure in terms of, LSU they don't have a maybe Texas A&M pass rush. Not that Alabama's faced that, but that's, obviously a team that generated pressure, or that generates a lot of pressure, but certainly they have players who can get after it a little bit. So yeah, I'm going to definitely watch that closely, how well he does. I think it'll be a big statement game from him if he can limit, mistakes and prevent pressure on Milroe. I'm also going to stay on the defensive side of the ball, I guess, for LSU, offense side for Alabama. I'm looking at a one-on-one specifically on the outside, and I know we talked about Kendrick Law, and maybe he'll be matched up more with this guy, or we'll see how it goes. But I'm looking at Ryan Williams specifically at wide receiver versus an LSU cornerback named Zy Alexander, and I just I'm kind of playing up a little fun narrative in my head here with this, but Zy Alexander, very good corner for LSU. We obviously know what Ryan Williams does for Alabama. Alexander, some stats on him. He's been targeted 18 times this year. He's allowed 6 catches for 32 yards, no touchdowns, and he has a pick, 14 tackles, and 2 pass deflections. He is their LSU's highest graded defensive player and has their highest coverage grade. So he's been an excellent corner. And I also just think it's fun because this guy's a veteran, 5th-year guy, transferred from Southeast Louisiana. Cool story, came up from the FCS. Now he's facing off against this Hollywood, everyone knows his name, freshman. I'm sure he's going to come out with something to prove. And Williams on the other side is going to be trying to burn him. And I think, how well he does that could have a big impact in this game. But Alexander, to me, is a name I wanted to shout out.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this, but Ryan Williams is only 17 years old, and he actually should be a senior in high school right now.
Right. I forgot about that.
Or I haven't heard anyone, and I don't think anyone's really talking about that. So that's another thing to mention. That he's still young.
He's still young.
He didn't vote in the election.
He couldn't vote. Yeah, he couldn't vote. That's a very good point. Yeah, and I mean that does have an impact in terms of. I mean, this is he's obviously been to Neyland now, but another big environment that he's facing on the road. He's looked like he could handle pretty much everything, but yeah, I think that'll be interesting. And Alexander seems like a guy who, can match up well against pretty much any SEC receiver. I feel like the other thing we should throw out too is Mason Taylor on the defensive end for Alabama and guarding him. I mean, Womack, kind of talked about him he's the 6'5", 270-pound guy. He's kind of has a mismatch all over the field. Burned Alabama before in years past on plays. He, for me, is another big one. If you have any thoughts on him.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's. I think Womack said that he's the best tight end that they've faced, or at least one of them. And he's going to be a guy that's going to be high on draft boards as well. Another tight end, just because I wrote about him and I featured him, Robbie Utes on the Alabama side. Maybe not as much in the receiving game, but if you look at that Missouri game, and I kind of mentioned this in my feature, he opened up so many holes for Alabama. He does so many things that you don't see necessarily. But he's that lead blocker on a lot of those huge runs. And so you talk about Alabama, protecting the protecting Jalen Milroe and setting up the running game, I think Robbie can help with both of that. If you are struggling with Elijah Pritchett, maybe you put Robbie beside him as some extra pass protection. I know you're limiting your receiving options there, but maybe you need to. And then on some of the running plays, maybe he sets something up. Maybe, you look at the 271 yards Alabama had against South Carolina last, I guess 2 weeks ago. Not South Carolina, against Missouri 2 weeks ago. I think he played a huge role in that. So, he's not necessarily a name that jumped off the page on a stat sheet, but I think he could be really big in this game. And if we're going for narrative, since I wrote about him, I mean, let's have
right. I was going to
have a rainy game. 4th and 5 in the final minute for Alabama. Alabama's down by let's say 4 points, and you just run the ball to Robbie, or maybe not 4th and 5, maybe 4th and 2 from the 4th and goal from the 2. Hand the ball off to Robbie Yates, give him that first handoff from the fullback position. That would totally make my narrative. If you go read my story, I talked to former fullbacks, because that's really what Robbie's going to play at the next level is fullback. I'd love to see him maybe get that fullback. He's lined up as a fullback for Alabama, in some packages, but he's never gotten that handoff. I'd love to see him get that just for, he does all the dirty work. It'd be nice to see him kind of get to run the ball once.
Yeah, imagine that in the biggest game basically of the year to this point as well. Would be very fun. Yeah, go read Tony's feature. If you are just a hard-nosed old school football fan, that is the feature for you. There's some great quotes in there about just good old-fashioned fullback play and kind of the modernization of the position. And yeah, that's one that Robbie is for sure excelling. And I mean, it goes back with Jalen Milroe is going to run the ball a lot, maybe to the outside. You throw him out there as an extra blocker that could be a big difference maker. So yeah, tight end talk. There you go. Tight end / fullback talk to wind it down in terms of rolling into predictions, Tony, which I think we should segue into. Obviously didn't have any last week for Alabama's game because they were, of course, on bye. Do you have a prediction ready? Otherwise, I did write a score before we came.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to go 34-24 Alabama. I think that,
okay.
I talked about those non-offensive scores. I could see there being a big one maybe in the fourth quarter, finally breaks through and kind of ends the game where it's kind of back and forth. And then you get maybe, I don't know if it'll be a fumble return for a touchdown or an interception return for a touchdown, but I think Alabama finally, they're just due. I mean, I covered the 2016 team where Alabama was scoring more non-offensive touchdowns and some teams were scoring offensive touchdowns. And so it's just weird to see this team not get one. So I'm just maybe speaking it into existence for Alabama fans, just because they're fun to watch too. I say that's going to be the difference, and that they get a late non-offensive touchdown and kind of get that 10-point lead and then kind of hold on.
Okay. Do you have a player to watch then? Maybe the guy that gets that non-offensive touchdown.
Yeah, I guess obviously we already decided that Robbie Yates is scoring a rushing touchdown. So,
okay. You rolling with that?
But, maybe I'm trying to think of who would be the most likely to get that. It just seems like it'd be Malachi Moore for some reason. It just So maybe I'll give it to Malachi. Maybe he scores. He a guy that's been on some of these great defenses. Maybe he breaks the trend and or breaks that drought and gets that non-offensive touchdown. So I'll go with Malachi. I think I like it. As a
you have I have no limit on twice. You said you had him as your player for Tennessee as well, but
great. That's probably not the best sign. But.
I have no rules against using a player twice, and I say that because I'm also going to pick a player that I have picked already. I'm going 38-35 Alabama. I think this is going to turn into a shootout in Death Valley. I really like both of these offenses a lot. I think the Jalen Milroe running piece really intrigues me and how well he can do on the ground, or he can go on the ground. And I think if he has an explosive game, Alabama is going to score a lot of points because I think it's going to open some stuff up. I am less optimistic about the defensive touchdown. I do think LSU's offense is really good. I think they protect the quarterback really well. And they've got guys who they can find. I think if it happens, it will be off a Nussmeier, kind of just boneheaded mistake, which, Alabama can force those. But I like LSU to score a lot, but I think Alabama does pull it out narrowly and gets a huge win for their college football playoff chances. And to feed my narrative, I have Jalen Milroe as my player because I think if they're going to win this game, he's going to have a big game on the ground and score a few touchdowns and cement a maybe Mr. November piece. So We both like Alabama. This is a huge one. Put your predictions in the comments if you're watching along on the YouTube. Love to hear them ahead of this game. It's a big one in Death Valley. Like I said, 6:30 on ABC. You can watch it if you're going. Enjoy the trip. I don't know. I haven't looked at hurricane or tropical storm watch. I know there was some weather talk early in the week, but I think that dissipated. So that's good. Should have a nice
you might get some rain. I don't think it's going to be quite the storm,
Yeah.
Anyway, I think the worse the weather, though, I think it would help Alabama. I just think, yeah, I just think you take away the passing game. LSU can be so one-dimensional that if you're playing, Alabama would love to play this game in a monsoon because Jalen Milroe can still run in a monsoon. I don't think Garrett Nussmeier can pass as well in a monsoon. So
it's very simple.
I don't think we're going to get that, but if the weather does get bad, Alabama, I think, will be the one that would benefit from it.
I agree. Let's finish off with our college football picks of the week, our 5 games. We're in week 11 now. Obviously, week 10 last week on the bye, we did do those games, even though Alabama wasn't playing. We both tied 2-2, Tony. We each got 2 games right. Oh my gosh, no, we didn't. I bubbled the wrong score. You got 2 games right. I got 1 game right. So
see, there it is. Cheating.
Hey, I corrected. I don't know how I highlighted that incorrectly, but all right. You got 2 games right. I got 1 game right, which means we are both tied now overall, 20-20 from in the season. So last week we had Ohio State, Penn State, big game of the week. You had Ohio State. They won by 7. They were 3-point favorites. Pitt versus SMU. The Panthers let us down. We both picked Pitt. SMU won that game by 23. SMU was 7-point favorites, but Pitt did not pull the upset there. Texas A&M and South Carolina. This is the one I'm going to pat myself on the back on because I did get this right. I said South Carolina could maybe do the same thing they did against Tennessee a couple of years ago. They did just that. They beat Texas A&M by 24. You had the Aggies, so another Texas team letting you down there. I know the Longhorns burned you a couple weeks ago against Georgia.
I just never get Texas games right.
Right. Ole Miss and Arkansas. I tried to be cute and pick Arkansas to cover the 7.5-point spread. Ole Miss won that game by 32 points. So I'll take the L on that one. And then we both had the Clemson Tigers over Louisville as 10-point favorites, and Dabo Swinney laid an egg. Louisville won that game by 12 points. So not a super great week, but you did get 2 out of the 5 that week. So there's week 10. We'll roll into week 11. And we'll start. We have a couple of SEC games. There aren't a ton of super marquee top 25 games, but I think some interesting ones in the SEC, or at least more interesting than maybe some of the lower tier games in other conferences. And, we're an SEC bias podcast. I think we can lean into that. We'll go to Columbia, Missouri first, Tony, for a game that, heading into the season, I think could have been potentially really fun, but is now just kind of gross with the way these 2 teams are trending. You have Oklahoma and Missouri. The Sooners are 2.5-point favorites on the road against the Tigers. A little old Big 12 rivalry renewed here. Who do you like?
Give me I was just caught up with how bad this matchup is. What's the?
It's very bad. That's okay. Oklahoma minus 2.5 on the road.
I'm gonna take Missouri. I'm just gonna hope that Brady Cook plays just enough for Missouri. I mean, neither of these teams really have a quarterback if he's not out there. But the fact that Missouri's at home, maybe they can shake off what was the terrible game against Alabama. I don't love Missouri, but they are at home. I also don't love Oklahoma. So give me the Tigers. Give me Tigers.
We can be very quick about this. I am taking Oklahoma. There is a world, I think, where the amount of punt yards decides this game. I think it might be. I think it might be a 1st to 14. I would not encourage anybody to watch this, but nevertheless, thought it'd be more interesting because we know a little bit more about both these teams than some ACC game that we're a little bit guessing more on. But I'm going with Oklahoma.
Alabama would like Missouri to win as many games as it can.
Yes.
They're still a ranked team. They were ranked in the college football playoffs.
They sure were. Won't happen.
Jack. It's not over yet.
It will be over very swiftly.
It might be this weekend, but
It will probably be over very fast. But yes, I guess if you're an Alabama fan with this on, you're rooting for Mizzou, but I wouldn't watch this game. Next, this one actually, like, to me, is a little bit more fun because of what's happened in the last couple of weeks, and just with both these teams being kind of like good and fun. We're going over to First Bank Stadium, a house of horrors for Alabama, very nearly a house of horrors for Texas too. But the question this week, will it be a house of horrors for the rising South Carolina Gamecocks, who come in as 6.5-point favorites? They have been disrespecting Vanderbilt at home all season. Do you like the Commodores to beat a South Carolina team that, could be in for a big letdown game? They just had the high of beating Texas A&M. Now they play Vanderbilt. I don't think anyone's overlooking Vanderbilt anymore, but, do you see a letdown game, or do you have South Carolina maybe covering on the road?
Look, I like Diego Pavia, and I like Vanderbilt, and I don't want to seem like a hater, but I am glad that they beat Auburn and got that 6th win last weekend, because I'm not sure they're going to win another game this season. Their schedule is pretty tough, and I think South Carolina is a team on the rise. I'm going to go with South Carolina, and it's not really because I'm like just overlooking Vanderbilt. I think Vanderbilt, the fact that they got the 6 wins with the schedule that they had is pretty remarkable. The magic might be out though. I think it's their dream season kind of starts to fizzle, and I think it starts with South Carolina.
I'm going to agree with you. This would be such a massive win for Vanderbilt, just because, like you said, then they play LSU and Tennessee. But I've been forming narratives all season long. Most of them have been wrong. So maybe if you're a Vanderbilt fan, you'll be happy I'm not on your side. But I'm forming a new one for South Carolina. I've liked how they've looked since that Alabama game. I think they've been great. I think Shane Beamer started to find a little something with this offense. The defense obviously speaks for itself. It's really good. I think they're going to finish 9-3. I think they're going to beat Vanderbilt this week. I think they're going to beat Missouri at home the week after that. They play Wofford. That will be a win. Then I think they're going to go to Clemson, South Carolina, and knock off their arch rival on the road and finish 9-3. And Shane Beamer is going to be this watch out for South Carolina next year. That's the story we're going to have. So,
and then you don't have to worry about the Missouri loss, because as an Alabama fan, because you'll probably have a ranked win over South Carolina.
South Carolina. There you go. It all works out in the SEC. All works out. All right. Next 3 games all feature ranked teams, I promise. I'm going to go to we're going to go to the Big 12 first. We got 2 Big 12 games for you, actually. Big rivalry. We got the Holy War, Tony. BYU against Utah. Obviously, Utah kind of underperforming at 4-4, but BYU is going on the road, and they're only 3-point favorites despite being undefeated, number 9 in the country. Do you like the Utes here to maybe pull off an upset at home?
No, I'm going with the Cougars. I think a lot of people are sleeping on them, and obviously they're probably not too happy with their playoff ranking. I think, what are they, 8th or 9th?
Well, officially, yeah, they're officially 9th, but they would get the 4 seed because they lead
but
the Big
they're
12.
Also at 9th. They're at risk of being passed by, an ACC champion, or if SMU got the win, they get passed, or if the what do you call it? If Boise State was to finish above them, so they're not comfortable, they're not happy. I think that they're gonna maybe play with a little bit the point to prove they are undefeated, and so I'll take the Cougars. I'll go with BYU.
I'm gonna be different just to be different here. The Big 12 has cannibalized itself all season. Give me the Utes and Cam, 60,000-year-old rising. Actually, I'm not even sure if he's healthy. Let me check. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Utah to win. I've been disappointed in them. They've not performed very well in conference play at all. But yeah, why not? I guess they've also lost 4 straight. This is probably a terrible pick.
Am I wrong in thinking that Cam Rising somehow is coming back next year because he's hurt? And
he might be. He is actually not healthy. It's Isaac Wilson is their guy now, a freshman from Utah. Though he knows the rivalry.
Grandpa Rising is not going to be able to lead the Utes to victory.
Oh, can I change? I won't change. I'll be different and fun. Utah's definitely not winning this game, but I'll go with it anyway.
You can go back. You can go back. I'm okay with
it. I'll stay with it. I want to be different. It's more fun. Okay. Staying in the Big 12, we're going down to Lubbock, Texas, Tony. Colorado working their way slowly back into that conversation. They're at number 20 right now, and they're 4-point favorites in a huge game against a not bad Texas Tech team. This is a hard game for Colorado, which is why I wanted to put it on. Like I said, 4-point favorites, the Buffaloes. I've just realized I've done 4 road underdog or home underdog games, in a row. Who do you like in this one?
Yeah, the Texas Tech had an upset last week. I don't think they go two upsets in a row, so I will take Deion Sanders and the Buffs of Colorado.
So I've been going back and forth. I'm wondering how much that upset, like you said, Texas Tech beat Iowa State by 1 last week on the road. How much is that as Iowa State being a little fraudy? How much is that Texas A&M getting, or Texas Tech getting a little lucky? Or have the Red Raiders found something? I think the Red Raiders might have found something. I like Taj Brooks, their running back. Give me the Raiders in this one. Shout out Chris Berman.
Oh, okay. The different
Let's go
Raider,
Texas. Let's go Texas Tech. Let's go Texas Tech. And then the big one, biggest game of the week other than Alabama, LSU, and it is, of course, still in the SEC. Number 3, Georgia. Also road favorites. That is 5 out of 5 road favorites in this game. 2.5-point favorites going to Oxford, Mississippi to face number 16, Ole Miss. Who do you got?
I have a friend who is a Big Ten fan, and he told me that Penn State is just Ole Miss north of the Mason-Dixon line. And he's so right. He's so right. They both always have like huge expectations, and they just always fail. And I love Lane Kiffin, but he's not going to win this game against Kirby Smart. Just because Ole Miss is just not going to make the playoff, and like they're going to have this, great off season and do absolutely nothing with it. And that's just what those two programs do. They just don't capitalize on their talent or their, opportunities. So no, I'm going to go with Georgia to win that game. And I just wanted to shout out to my friend Swiggy, Andrew Swigolo, for giving me that one. But it couldn't be more true.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I'm also picking Georgia. I don't think any more needs to be said. I think Kirby knows how to win the big one. I don't know that Lane does, and I like Lane Kiffin, but I think this knocks Ole Miss out of the playoff. I think you're spot on. Be a dark day in Oxford, Mississippi, if Tide Illustrated has anything to say about it. There you go. There's our 5 picks. Say that again.
Still win the party though.
Right.
Ole Miss always wins the party. So
always wins the party. There you go. There's our 5 picks just to run it through again. Georgia, Ole Miss, we both went with Georgia. Texas Tech, Colorado. I'm going with the Raiders. Tony picked the Buffaloes. Holy War, we also differed. Tony picked BYU. I picked Utah. Tony will be right. South Carolina, Vandy, we both got the Gamecocks. And Oklahoma, Mizzou. Tony went with Mizzou. I have the Sooners coming into Columbia and winning that game. Enjoy the weekend of college football. Enjoy the LSU game. If you're going, enjoy it on TV. It should be a great one. I'm very excited to be. It's my first game in Tiger Stadium, so I'm excited to be there for it. Excited to see Baton Rouge. And we'll see how it plays out for Alabama. We'll recap the game. We'll have plenty of coverage over on Tide Illustrated, so subscribe there. Go there right now to read Tony's feature on Robbie Utes. It was a great one. And we will see you next time.